Okay, it looks like we're live. My name's Christian Bradley, live for the Game Institute. Whoops, everything just shut down. Where'd it go? There we go. Live for the Game Institute, streaming from our radio tower in Mexico City today. And we're going to be talking about some creature anatomy. First off, just welcome everybody. And if you're watching on YouTube, can't use the chat there, but you can go to gameinstitute.com. You can use the beta site button in the top left, and you can go to our live feed there on gameinstitute.com. And then you can interact with us if you would like. Got a chat room there for you. It's like going to the movies. So we're going to be talking about creature anatomy. This is a series I put together just for the streaming. It's a little history. We're putting together a massive curriculum project behind the scenes at Game Institute, which I've mentioned before. And so my little world at Game Institute is mainly dealing with the tutorial videos that have to do with the art side of things and 3D, and then putting this curriculum together, which means you guys don't see me much except for these streaming videos. And all these streaming videos have subjects that are in the curriculum. And the curriculum's about what you'd expect. It would train you to be a professional. It's not just 10, 20 videos like we've done before. It's a big giant curriculum with classes and grades, and you got to pass one class to get into the next class. The whole shebang. We're probably talking about 2,000 hours of student time. So as you'd imagine, well, it takes a long time because it's just me writing it with the help of whoever I pay to help me. So one of the subjects that we cover is anatomy, and we have a character modeling class that I just started working on, but anatomy is a big chunk of that class. And when I've taught anatomy at the college level, we always broke anatomy up into kind of some major animal types. Obviously, human was a big chunk of that. We're not going to deal with that right now. But cats are easy to figure out the anatomy, and cats apply to a whole lot of different animals because of the way they're built, so they're a good one. Horses are a good one. Birds are a good one because they've kind of got their own strange things going on. And then I always did dinosaurs. Well, partially because everybody's interested in dinosaurs and it kept everybody's attention. But dinosaurs have their own anatomy too, and we don't really know what all these dinosaurs really look like, but we have enough stuff and enough smart people doing drawings that we can kind of take a look at the anatomy of something that was, for the most part, the ones we're going to look at, just gigantic and really heavy, and how these creatures, we can at least imagine how they would move. Now, before anybody goes and attacks me on evolution or anything else, I'm not an expert. I just am the artist, so with an interest in dinosaurs. So, don't attack me. I can't defend myself. I don't know. But we'll take a look at these. Now, these are drawings. I did not do these drawings. They're just very good examples of what we're talking about. The main areas we're going to take a look at here. Let me get a color we can see. Are going to be in the hips. Not big enough. So the hips, the legs, and the shoulders, mainly because those are the interesting parts as far as building your creature. The tail, usually kind of gets taken care of pretty well. The rib cage kind of gets taken care of, and the head's going to be different on all your creatures, so we'll kind of ignore that for the time being. We've got a few things, though. We can take a look at the hips here first. So let me step backwards here. Okay. Let's go to a layer. And let's zoom in a little bit here. There we go. So our creature Now this is like a T-Rex Allosaurus. No, they say Tyrannosaurus Rex. Okay, so Tyrannosaurus Rex. There's a couple little parts we want to pay attention to if we're designing our own creature. And I'm going to focus on the parts that you can see from the outside. The parts that are close to the skin and the parts that would have to do with how this guy moves and carries weight. So it's not going to be a real anatomy. Plus that would take a real long time. The first thing is the hips of most big, heavy critters. It doesn't have to be a dinosaur. You know, hippos and bears and lions, big things. Us. Not so much on little things, but on big things. Have the hip bone really high up. So you're going to see this kind of hip bone crest here. That's one thing. Let me get a few other pictures here we can switch between. Just a second. This will show us a little bit better too. So they have that hip bone really high. Now, most critters do, but you don't see it. So on small creatures, you don't necessarily see these hip bones because they don't have to carry so much weight. And without being a physics major or being able to really explain what's going on here, all this weight, remember these guys were huge, so think of something like a car that had to be pushed on legs. A transformer. You got to get a big, old, powerful area right in here. Now that's inside the creature, so we don't necessarily see that. But where these hips hit, you got to have a great, big, heavy bone. It makes sense, again, going back to the idea if you're going to take a school bus or a car and you're going to prop it up on some big metal legs. Well, you can't just weld those metal legs to the side of the car and prop it up. It's just going to rip off. You got to get it connected in the center. And let me get a new picture here so I can draw. Let me fill this with white. Actually, I have a light gray. So we've got to have a huge centerpiece. Let's do this in blue. So, for instance, let's do this in blocks. So if this is our giant, big, heavy block, right? Let's say this is our critter. And you need to lift this up off the ground. Let's say this is as big as a school, and you got to lift it up off the ground. If you just go and put some legs on this guy, kind of like those, like mechs, right? We always see this in games. You just put some legs and you just put them on the side of this guy, and there's going to be some on the other side, right? So this guy, you know, he's just got legs welded on the side of him. Chances are, even though my mech-loving viewers will probably disagree, this would just rip apart. It wouldn't hold together. You're putting all the weight on the outside, so it would just shear right. But if we take that same concept, take this same guy. Remember, he's really heavy. So we're not talking about light creatures because they don't have to bear all that weight. But if we had a interior piece in here, which basically is going to be the hips of our dinosaur. So you've got like an interior piece. And then you hook all that mechanical gear to that interior piece. Something like that. And then it's going to come out on the other side. You've got a much better chance of this thing not just shearing off at the sides when it's all connected in the center. You know, plus your center of gravity is a little bit better off. You're bearing the weight in a stronger spot. So if we go back to our skeleton here, now this is a side view, But this big bone, again, you can't see it because it's inside your creature, is going to bear the weight of those legs. So if you're doing a hippo or a rhino or a bison or anything, it's got to have this big hip, which means you got to put it somewhere. It's got to be raised up in the center of your creature. So if we were to kind of draw a line through here and say that's his center of weight. Makes sense. Looks about right. Remember, if we filled this guy out, he'd look something like this. There'd be a whole lot of skin back here on the back of him. Not to mention you got big old legs here. Something like that. So that's about right for his center. And usually that pivot or that hip, I'm going to put it in dark blue, is going to be right there at where all the weight is being held, or most of his weight. Keep in mind his spine carries a lot of the weight. So it's kind of the same as that main beam in your house, that weight-bearing beam that's somewhere in your house that you don't want to cut. His spine's carrying a lot of weight, so that's why this isn't always in the center. You can see his spine right through here is really thick, and that's because it's shifting some of that weight. It's all his internal organs and rib cages and stuff. That's all going to get shifted a little bit. So as far as what you're making up in your creatures, you can kind of move this around and have some fun with it, because we don't see all this interior stuff. But go back to where these hips meet. That hip bone's going to be pretty pronounced at the top. It has to be, because it has to raise up, and it's such a big structure. Again, it's kind of the same thing as that beam, that weight-bearing beam that's somewhere in your house or apartment. It has to be pretty big, and it's really hard to hide in the walls. That's why it's usually exposed, or it has like a big, I forgot the name of it, but a piece of drywall over it. But you can see it usually. It's hard to hide. It's big. It's got to be thick. So as these bones, or his leg bones, come out of here, and again, I'm going to draw these in. I need a better color and a thicker brush here. Let's do, we'll do this in red. There we go. So here's about what his leg would look like. Actually, it wouldn't look like that. It would be closer here. It would attach to his knee there. Come down, and then you'd end up with something like that. Come back around, and then most of the thickness is going to be back here on the back side. So you're going to end up with something like that. This would be huge right there. I'm going to kind of fill this in so you can see what the structure would look like, or something close to it. And the reason all this really matters is when you're building your own creatures and you're making stuff up, students tend to, deal with it like it's Dr. Seuss or something, where they just kind of jam parts together. They know they need legs, they know they need arms, they know they need a head. They just kind of jam it together and then attach it with all these blobby parts. And it ends up looking more like a stuffed animal or a little plastic toy than it would something that we could believe in. And you don't have to, dinosaurs don't, the ones you're making up don't have to look like dinosaur skeletons or anything. But you do want it to look like it could move. You want it to look like it could bear all this weight. And so it makes sense if you're going to have this giant ridge here where his hip is pointing up through his body, because this bone, right, if I do this right, I can color coordinate everything as I go. This bone right here has to be so high on the body, it's actually down here too. Then you're going to have a huge hunk of meat up here holding that together. And all of that I'm coloring in here is going to go around that big old top bone. And what's interesting, if you follow Dinosaurs at all, is we find a lot of these big bones last so long. They're big. They're gigantic. So that bone right there is going to be huge. Now you don't see it. That's all inside the leg for the most part. There's usually a little point here on the knee that we can see. But all that muscle has to be huge. So if you put scrawny little legs on this guy, it's not going to look right. It's not going to look like it can bear the weight. Another issue are the way this guy's bones are structured. I'm going to kind of scribble in the three main bones here. Those are the same bones we have in our body. Now they may be named something different in dinosaurs, and they may act a little different, but they're basically the same bones. This top bone here, that one, is this guy's upper leg on us. Makes sense, it's the top bone. Most of this you can't see on most animals. It's up in the body. We're actually kind of the weird ones that have it exposed with our legs sticking out because we walk upright and most animals don't. So monkeys, people, you can see this bone. But most animals you don't. And it totally throws students because it starts off in a different direction than what they expect because it's up in the body. So it starts off going this direction on most critters. The next bone down, that obvious bone, that's our lower leg bone. And you can see where the problem starts. A lot of students think this is the upper leg. And I'll show you what happens. This is the lower leg. Now I'm talking on us. Very official terminology here. But that's our lower leg. So our knee is right there where that blue thing is. This guy's. That's his kneecap right there. It's almost inside the leg. You almost don't see that. Usually the leg starts right about there and comes down on big heavy critters like this. Most four-legged animals especially. And this bottom piece, you might be wondering, well, then what the hell is that? If this is the lower leg, that's the ankle. And you can start to see how this guy has the same bones as us. It's just they're moving exactly the same as ours, but that's why his leg is going to look different. I'll show you what I mean. We'll call this the top of our foot instead of the ankle. That's a little more. His ankle would actually be right there. That's his ankle. So, by the way, these little spurs out, this is a toe. A lot of students think that's his ankle because it would make sense. We kind of think the little spikes would come off the back of our ankle if we were werewolves or something. That's actually a toe. It's just evolved to kind of bend backwards. A lot of animals have that. I'm not necessarily sure why, but it makes sense. If this is the top of the leg, then the toes come down, and you can see that that little guy there is actually a toe. So that's the top of our foot. And then these little guys down here, these are basically our toes. Sort of, kind of. The top of our foot has a whole bunch of bones in it, and on most creatures those bones get a little bit extended, a lot extended, and so you end up with these big feet. But go back over to our original Dino version here. Let's get a new layer. Oops. Smaller picture. Need a smaller brush. Come on. Where's my... There we go. So we end up with these big structures when you're designing your own creature. Like if I'm doing this leg, you can see how big that is. Now they don't have very much meat on this guy, so I'll kind of follow along. You can see how much structure you got to build in around that bone in order to carry the weight. Now for the most part, if you got a creature that's going to be fast, or he's going to run, let's not say fast, I don't know if the T-Rex was particularly fast, Probably could catch me, but something an ostrich, let's say, that's similar to this. Great big animal, runs real fast. Then you got to have some really skinny parts down here at the bottom of his leg. At least in every critter we can imagine that really runs super fast. Down here at the bottom, that's in pink, you got to have some areas and basically it's the flex. So these act like trampolines or springs, so that when he takes a step, a bunch of energy gets tied up in all this tendon and this skinny structure down here, and then springs forward and transfers up to his hips. That's what's going to get him moving forward. So if you have something like an elephant, I'm going to go back to my little picture here. If you've got something like an elephant that's real big, same thing. Let's say not fast. Now I know elephants are fast, so once they get moving, they're going to go faster than we can go. I'm just saying you want him to look like he can go fast. Elephants kind of shuffle. So if I've got myself a big creature, we'll do a side view here. Whoops. Something like an elephant. So here's his rib cage. And here's that big hip bone we talked about in an elephant. It would kind of be back here. This is his back. Here's his head. Can't figure out what's going on. There's his head. And he's very worried. So that big hip bone, you got the same structures. You're going to have that great big bone coming out, and it always goes forward. It really can't backwards unless you're talking about alligators or something really close to the ground. And then you've got that other bone. Now on an elephant, these are almost all fused together. They do have a little kneecap. It's right there. And then kind of this other bone. And again, elephants, all very... It's a lot of fused together stuff you got going on. They have their little toes down here too. And so what you would end up with is a big old leg, but it's going to look pretty tree trunk-ish. I think they kind of have a great big back end here. Something like that. And that's because they don't have those springy parts down at the legs. Lots of other reasons too. But if we want our critter to look like a dragon or something that's going to move really fast, you probably want to start with his legs really thick to hold that weight, but then get him down to those springy bird-like feet that we might recognize a little bit better. Okay, let's look at the top of this also, because that matters. So when we're sculpting in, keep hitting the wrong button. When we're sculpting in ZBrush or Mudbox or whatever it is you're using, we got to deal with the top view too and how these things angle out. And this is a pretty good view. The side view, again, students always just want to plug in a creature's leg. So if this is a side or a front view, so this is a front view of, say, from here to here. It's a front view. And his hips, which would be, we're just going to kind of draw them in here as a form, would look something like, whoops, something like that. They're crooked, but that's okay. They always want to put the bones in as if they would just fit in like an action figure. Like they just come straight down. Something like that. And that's not how they work. I mean, they couldn't work that way. And again, we're built the same way, it's just we're a little bit more boring, I think. So what happens is these bones, you can see it here, see how it angles out from the body? So they tend to clear the body, because you got this, you got a great big body in here that you have to clear. Those legs have to get around it. Again, on us, we don't really have to, because our legs kind of stick out underneath us. There's not much for them to crash into. They still stick out from the hips, but there isn't a lot for it to crash into. And you got to get those legs really far out. So those bones stick outward a little ways. Something like that. This bone right here we're talking about sticks outward. It kind of comes out from the body. And then they usually have to come back in under the body, because you got to get these legs back under the body to get you a tight center of gravity, so this guy can pivot and turn. So usually that next bone comes in a little bit more. And it's not always like this. I mean, different creatures have different ways they move, and once you start playing with these concepts, you can make up whatever you want. But so something like that. Those, I'll paint those in a different color so you can see them. But those bones are going to come outward, then in towards the center of his body a little more, and then usually kind of straighten out towards the bottom a little bit. And again, our bones actually do the same thing. It's just not that pronounced. So by the time, if you're trying to figure out when you're designing your creature where the feet should be, if I draw a line down the center of my critter, and that line is right there on my dino, down through the center, that spot right there should have the feet almost touching each other. The slower he is, the wider those are going to be, the faster he is, the closer together they're going to be. Again, in general. If you look at something like a cheetah versus a lion, say goodbye to elephant here. He's got to go. Next time I do this, I need to remember to record these, because these would record better than the 3D ones. So let's come back over here. And if we're looking at something like a cheetah and a lion, very similar. The skeletons would be hard to tell apart if you had a small lion and a cheetah. But if we were to look at them from the side, I don't have a picture in front of me, so this may be a little bit weird, but it's going to be about the same. I mean, slight differences, but the hips are going to ride pretty high. And then you're going to have that big bone, that top leg bone coming out of the body. That next bone's coming down. This will be on a lion. And then you're going to have that kind of small bone here, and then some sort of little stuff down here at the bottom. You're going to get something like that. This bone would probably be bigger, but something like that. On a cheetah, let's do this. On a cheetah, you're going to have basically the same bones. This top bone would probably be smaller, I'm guessing. But everything's going to be a little bit more pronounced. And it doesn't take much. And a little bit, at least relatively longer, relative to their overall size. And yeah, I don't know, something like that. You probably have a bunch of little phalanges and toe stuff going on down there at the bottom. So you'd end up with, this is a very muscular cheetah. I don't know if cheetahs are that muscular. And on a lion, he works out. He wants to be a lion someday. You're going to end up with a little more of this kind of post leg type structure. It's probably a little bit heavier, I would guess. And if I draw in some lines really quick, you'll see the difference. So here's your cheetah. On the side of these, this is my cheetah. That's his hip. Would be coming out, down, and then probably something like that. Here's his foot. On the lion, let's make that a little bit more pronounced. There you go. On a lion, it's going to be probably just as pronounced at the top, but the bottom not so much. And again, if we were to draw that line right down the center, that area right there is going to be a little bit longer on a lion than on a cheetah, because the cheetah wants to go super fast. He's got to pivot and turn on a dime and all sorts of drag racing type stuff, where a lion still got to go fast, but you're after a little bit more power. He can kind of crash through stuff a lot more than a cheetah can. So you're not going to have that racing type back end like on a cheetah. So back to our dinosaurs, if you apply all that same type of thing to those hips, when you're creating your own creatures, it gives you a good place to start. You can always start with the hips, drag in something like the spine. Actually, let's go the other way. Drag in something like the spine, and then you kind of know that some of these parts and pieces have to behave a certain way so that you can get that feeling that you want from your creature. He's either fast, or he's big and powerful and slow, whatever it might be. But you can at least get those big bones in there. Now the shoulder I said we'd talk about, it's not really as complex. Let's go to a new layer here, or at least as far as art part goes. And that's because these shoulder blades, these guys right here, paint them in. The shoulder blades on most animals, they don't serve a different purpose, but they're kind of in a different place than we'd expect them on us. Our shoulder blades get way up by our, let's do it this way. Here's our head. There you go. He's happy. He's helping. Our shoulder blades get way up here by our neck. And then we have our rib cage kind of down here. And our arms kind of hang off the side, right? Well, that's because our arms kind of hang off the side. So these are kind of like coat hangers that attach all of these back muscles and chest muscles together, but give us a strong foundation to stick those arms out to the side so that they can kind of hang off. It's kind of a simple concept. It's a lot like an action figure or something. They just kind of hang there. But you got to get all this muscle up in this area on us in order to hold those arms up, because they're kind of sticking out to the side. Most creatures don't really do that, especially if they're bipedal and walk around on the ground, and that's because they got to get a whole lot of muscle up here on top of the critter, right up in that area, to hold all the weight. Now our T-Rex here, of course we picked the dude with the smallest, tiniest little arms, but dinosaurs were very similar in that you get this big bone, and it's actually the shoulder blade. So again, it kind of throws students because they think this is an arm bone. You get this big thing stuck in the body, kind of the same idea as the hips. You got this big structure that everything's got a hold off of. And then you got smaller bones that kind of come out. Now I'm going to do something like say a Spinosaurus or something a little bit more mean looking. And so you end up with these great big structures. There you go. You could see fair if he had longer arms, like a raptor or something. But you got to start with this big piece, and that's not an arm bone. That's his shoulder bone or his collarbone, and so, or the equivalent of, probably that's a different name. But again, my students do this, and I'll show you what they do with the legs too. So, and then we'll wrap things up. So let's go back over here. Let's turn that off. Come down here. Let me clean this up here. So what my students do when they first start drawing with anatomy, and it makes perfect sense. I totally get it because I used to do the same thing, is starting with our dino, right? Here's his hip. Well, they get the hip there. Everybody kind of figures there's a hip in there. And here's his spine, and then his tail will be going off here. Is they immediately kind of associate everything with people bones. So they get bottom of his body. I need to get his silhouette in here real quick. Okay, there's his underside right here. His collarbone would be right there for reference. Is they stick in that knee bone and then that lower bone, just like a person. So here's his kneecap, right? And then they put a foot on him. But that's just going to make him look cartoony. The truth is, he'd just collapse. He'd just go straight down. All the weight would be right in here. He'd probably snap his leg bone off if you did that. The way he'd actually be built is you got to start this bone right there up here. So that big bone comes up here. Remember, most of it's up in the body. You don't even see it. Here's his kneecap, and then the lower bone, and then that top of the foot we talked about, and then he's got just a whole bunch of phalanges and toe muscles and toe bones and stuff down there. So you end up with that type of structure, which then leg, most of it up in his body again, attaches to that patella or that group of area where all those tendons come in, and then it would come down here. And that's his lower leg. And now you end up with something that probably looks pretty familiar, but isn't like us. All the bones are there. It's just students put them in the wrong spot. Same thing with his front legs. So, and the problem is they forget about the big collarbone. So that big collarbone sits in here, which you can kind of just sketch in. There is usually a little bump on two sides of his back. So if you look at your cat or your dog, you'll see that those two bumps, you can tell when they walk, those bumps will shift back and forth on the animal. That's those two shoulder blades shifting as the weight moves from leg to leg. And then from there, it's all the same as us. So that top arm bone swings back, bottom arm bone swings forward, and then you end up with all your little, knees or finger bones. It's not what they're called on a critter, but and so that huge giant collarbone area is what you see on most of your creatures. So it's the same as us. It's just I think students think this bone here is that bone there. They switch them, and obviously if you switch them, you get everything going in the wrong direction. So you end up with, this. It would be wrong. You end up with everything swinging back and coming out of the body like that. And you can see totally different. It's because that top bone gets forgotten about and this bone doesn't get jammed up into the body. So, anyways, just some hints about drawing your creatures. I find that stuff kind of fascinating. I haven't taught anatomy classes in many years. It's not really my background. I have fine art background, but it wasn't necessarily in life drawing and anatomy. And I try to go to a class or two every year on anatomy because I find it very complex. It's hard to keep up with what attaches to what. You don't necessarily really need to know all that, because that's inside the models. But you do need to know those structures that affect the skin and the look of the creature. And if you look around and you start applying that to all sorts of other animals, you'll find most animals have something in common. So if you want to make up a crazy chicken-headed lion snake creature, well, it's going to do you a lot of good to kind of know how those different things are built, so that when you attach all those parts together, it doesn't look like a patchwork quilt of just extra animal parts stuck together. Dale says the rear spur is for doing wheelies, so yes, it is. This is his wheelie spur right there, so that when he takes off, he can burn out and not flip over. I think that's his tail. Isn't his tail the wheelie bar? Keeps him from flipping over backwards. So anyways, there you go. So we've got a few more of these planned. I think there's one on birds and horses and something else that I don't remember. But they're going to show up every couple weeks. So I hope they help. Let me know. Okay then. I'll see everybody. Oh, we're Friday, so I should say good weekend to everybody. We are done for today. We are done until Monday. And Monday, check the calendar, everybody, because I do have some days off scheduled in there. Like I think it's like Tuesday, Wednesday, or something. So Monday we won't have quite as many videos. But I'll see you on. I said Monday. Next week we won't have quite as many videos. I'll see you all on Monday. Bye bye. Yeah, I need to record those. That would have been really good to record.